Welcome back to Aquaculture Academy, the business of shellfish aquaculture in North Carolina. In this segment, we're back at the development conference to hear from equipment suppliers. We'll be visiting Dave Serino, aquaculture coordinator at Carteret Community College. He'll be giving us a live site demonstration so we can get a deeper understanding of farming methods, gear and supplies, and issues impacting operations. These issues include storms, water quality, closures, and even insurance. Finally, we'll go over and visit Connor McNair at the NC Oyster Farm.
The nursery is sort of the source for the grow out operation, right? So some folks are working nurseries into their operation so they can try to integrate. But for new growers, the recommendation is get your seed from somebody else as big as you possibly can, because the smaller it is, the easier it is to kill. And when you buy your seed, be ready for where it's going to go. If you buy 100,000 seed that are this big, and they grow like this in 3 weeks, if you put them in one bag, that bag has now exploded and your oysters just all over the ground on the mud. So if you think that you can go back to it, every few weeks, not when they're small, they're growing at a really fast rate. So you kind of have to really be ready. You have to take into account that you're going to have some mortality with your smaller stuff, but also realize that the smaller they are, the faster they're growing, and really understand how much gear you're going to need to have, and don't build that gear when the oysters are this big, because by the time you get it done, they're good. So these are general culture zones. I'll come back to this slide a couple times. A few things to look at. You have your land-based operation, which would be some of your nursery operations. If you think you're going to, grow shellfish on land, it's going to cost you a whole lot of money in electricity. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be done. One of the growers that'll be shucking at Shuck, Rattle, and Roll tonight is one of my graduates who's in South Carolina, and they have these ponds that are right on the water, and they actually pump water through those ponds. It's just sort of like a land-based operation. You have your intertidal zone, which is where the tide is coming in and out. Part of the time it's out of the water, and part of the time it's submerged. And then subtidal are areas that very rarely are dry. They're always underwater. So then when you get here, you got on the bottom, suspended, and floating. So we're talking about clams, we're talking about on the bottom, something to think about. The same can be said for on-bottom culture of oysters. Again, it's just people don't get mad that there's an oyster reef near their house, that oysters are growing on the bottom. It's not an eyesore in any kind of way. And oysters can grow really well on the bottom. Chuck talked about the methods of getting them set. So this is called remote setting of oysters. You put your shell in either mesh bags or even like large cages. You get the spat set on it and you put it out on the lease. It is more for the kind of clustered wholesale bushel market, but Tommy right here will have some of his oysters that he grew on the bottom, spat on shell, and I was teaching a student, making sure they were good enough to shuck at the event tonight. This week we shucked a couple of them and they're phenomenal. They're pretty, they're delicious, just a little bit more work on the culling end, but he hasn't been out there every week flipping cages over for the last year plus when they were growing. Then you go to the containerized culture that Chuck talked about and Mike talked about, and the several different methods of doing that. And again, this is focused on that single oyster for the half shell market. That is what you have to understand before you get started, is what is the market you're going for? And if you hear a value like I can sell them for 50 cents a piece, you can't necessarily multiply that number 50 cents or whatever, 75 cents that some restaurants might pay times as many acres as you can possibly plan out, because now you're talking about distribution, and the larger your operation, usually the kind of the lower price that you sell at. But we're going to work our way through the water column. Still on the bottom, you can do containerized culture. These are just trays that you set on the bottom. It keeps them from getting silted in a little bit. It keeps them in one place. Doesn't really, some of them have covers on them to protect them somewhat from predation, but it really just sort of keeps them where they're at so you can access them easily. If you do have an area where there's a lot of sedimentation and you don't want your stuff to get buried, you can have a cage that sits a little bit up off the bottom, or a tray that sits a little bit up off the bottom, just to keep it out of the mud. Make sure you still have a really clean product that doesn't have any grit in it, and gives you some protection from any of the things that are living in the sediment or on the sediment. There's also cages, condos. The gear manufacturers are going to be the ones you want to talk about the specific kinds of gear. So I'm just going to talk about general types of production. Rack and bag, that was probably the original containerized culture, stuff that people have been doing here in North Carolina for a long time and still do. The rack itself is made out of rebar, PVC, pipe, or any other kind of material that just creates a surface for you to set your bag of oysters on. Again, just keeping it up off the bottom, making it nice and ergonomic, and you got to secure it. It secures it in place. So those are all things that you could do on a bottom lease, right? As long as you're not above 18 inches off the bottom, you just have a bottom lease and it could do all that. But now we're going to talk about suspended culture, which is typically going to lift you up off of 18 inches. One of the things that can be done there is what's called a long line system. And so it's some sort of rope or cable that is strung out and you hang your gear on it. There's mesh bags, there's hard plastic bags, there's wire mesh cages that are all used in this way. Some of them are just sit in one height, some of them you can actually adjust the height of that. One thing that's done in other areas is these suspended cages where they can put a whole bunch of stuff in them, and that's done with oysters as well as scallops and some other species, but they really require deep water, and there's not a lot of areas in North Carolina with really deep water, but they can be either suspended by buoys or rafts that are on the surface that you hang all that stuff from, and it usually requires some sort of crane or davit to lift it up out of the water to work it. But in 1 square foot of area, that's a lot of product, right? It's because you're using that vertical space in the water column. And the floating bags that we have here, again, these are sort of a low cost entry. They're single units that can be handled pretty easily. There's lots of different configurations. You'll see some of that with the gear manufacturers, and this is what is one of the more common ones around here. You can have a floating cage. Some of them have large floats so that you can flip the thing over and get the entire cage, the animals, all up out of the water. When you flip over one of these bags, the oysters stay in the water. They're in that top, 6 inches of the water column. You flip it over, one side of the cage is exposed to dry off any of the fouling that's on it, but the oysters stay in the water. If you're in an area that has issues with fouling on the oysters themselves, flipping them over will tumble them a little bit and maybe knock some of that fouling off, but it won't dry your oyster out, which is what you need to battle boring sponge and some of these other problems. So this is a way of fighting that. You can dry everything up out of the water. This is a floating cage design that has sort of it's a little bit smaller cage, a little bit smaller floats, but the same idea that you can dry everything at one time. Something that was worked on here by Skip Kemp, my predecessor, and Jim Schwarzenberg, who's been doing this a long time, is a Chubb system. And there's a lot of different sort of styles and designs of this, but it's basically a series of mesh bags with lines and floats that it's kind of like a single-use thing. It's like a plastic mesh bag that you can then grow it for one season. They're hanging up off the bottom so that they're not on the bottom. They're sort of either suspended or floating. You can try to lift the whole thing up and dry it if you have some mechanism to do that. But it's a low cost of entry thing. It's just line and mesh bags and not any of this other stuff. But it's sort of a disposable gear almost. So you do it for one, year to 2 year oyster production run, and by the time that you've harvested it, the gear's kind of falling apart and you gotta invest in that stuff again. Floats might be reusable, but the bags themselves are not. This is a Lent system. It's sort of a hybrid between the it's similar in some ways to that suspended gear, but it has a float on one side. And so as the tide comes up, the thing basically goes up and flips around with the tide, and you get a lot of tumbling of your oysters, which makes for a nice shell shape, keeps it kind of clean, and keeps everything moving. It also has a chance, if it is an intertidal area and you can adjust the height of your thing, you can dry your cages on every tide cycle as well. So we heard all about sighting, and that tells you some of this stuff of depth. Doesn't really tell you maybe too much about current, but there's really no substitution for going out to these sites and being there. Being there when it's beautiful and it's low tide, being out there when it's high tide, being out there when it's really high tide, being out there when the wind's blowing 20 or 30 knots. So you can see what it's like, what kind of energy you're dealing with, what kind of boat traffic you're dealing with, what kind of other uses you're dealing with. So it's one visit is not enough. You need to go out there lots of times, different times a year, busy days, and go out there 4th of July weekend. See if that's where people are setting up and picnicking and partying. Go out there when during different commercial fishing seasons and see if it's utilized. If it's set chock full of crab pots, or if it's somewhere someone sets nets, all that kind of stuff. Once you figure that out, you're going to decide, all right, is it near a boat ramp? Can I get to it easily? How much money do I have to get started with? What market am I trying to sell to? And you create some sort of production plan. Say, all right, I can produce this much this time of year, and all of that can go into how you're going to go and set this thing up. So there's a lot of variables in this gear selection. One is how much does it cost? That's kind of the biggest thing people worry about, because how much money in your pocket is how much you're going to spend. We talk about loan programs and all that kind of thing. When I teach, I try to teach people, how to make decisions, but for pretty low cost education, I'm hesitant to really give people advice on how to spend a whole bunch of money on something like this. But really look into how long it's going to last, how much can each unit hold, how much handling do you have to do to it? Can you do that just you standing in the water? Do you have to work it from your boat? Do you have to have any kind of hoists or cranes or any of that kind of stuff? Are you going to be able to control fouling, predation? Are you going to get that tumbling if you're doing oysters that you want to be really pretty? Are you going to get that motion? And then what we have all experienced this past fall is what do you do when a storm comes? Do you have a plan? Are you going to be able to have some sort of protection from the hurricane that's going to eventually come? So the materials that this stuff is made out of, you pretty much have your plastic mesh and your plastic coated wire are the two main construction materials. And then there's all sorts of hooks and ropes and clips and bungee cords and all that kind of stuff that goes into constructing these cages. And again, when we have a break, you get to go out. We have some of their sample gears out there, put your hands on it, feel it, and that's another thing we try to have in our demonstration center is the ability to sort of work with different kinds of gears, pick them up, see what they're like, and how you deal with them. Again, fouling is a huge issue, and it can be lots of these different organisms that come in and either are fouling up your cage, making it so you don't have any water flow, so your animals can't eat and then they can't grow, or they suffocate and die. Or it's something that's actually a pest to your animals, and those can be worms, mud blisters, or the Polydora worms. There can be the boring sponge that'll make your shell all crumbly, barnacles, you name it. Our biggest fouling organism here in Bogue Sound is oysters. Our oysters get spat fall. If we don't time it right and get those oysters out of the water within a week or two of a real strong spat fall, we have one market size oyster with 25 little oysters stuck to it. And then my students have to spend all this time breaking it off and making them look like halfway decent so that they can be eaten. So how do you do that? Again, air drying is one. There's dips. You can do a freshwater dip or a saline or a hypersaline dip, a brine dip to try to kill off some of this stuff. Power washing, tumbling, taking the animals out of the cage, putting them on either a boat, a floating platform, or bringing them up on land and running them through some sort of tumbling machine. all to try to keep everything clean and growing and pretty and at its highest market value.
Morning, everybody. Lucked out with the weather here today. Got our friend Connor, and he brought a whole crew, the whole McNair family today. So we're excited to get out to the farm.
Excited to take you all out. Welcome to Topsail Sound.
So Connor, tell us about the family operation here. You know, it's not a one-man show.
No, not at all. I mean, I think we hope to really capture what this industry can kind of move forward and be. Like, honestly, with just 3 people, we grow a few 100,000 oysters that get sold all around the country, all with North Carolina's label on it, all with this great, beautiful place in mind. And growing oysters really tags people into that region and this farm and how we operate. So I really think that, you know, in telling the story about the farm and the family and kind of our story behind how we grew up into this industry was, you know, something we had to do.
Great. Well, so we're here at beautiful Topsail Sound. Will you please introduce us to the team?
Of course, this is my younger brother, James McNair. And my fiance, Alyssa Fainenstein.
So Connor, how big is the NC Oyster Company's lease that we're going to be checking out today?
Our lease is 8 acres total. We only operate on 1 acre of water column, which means that you can use all of the water from the bottom all the way to the top, no matter what it floats, whatever dues. We don't have any floating gear, but that is what you're allowed to do. And then we have 7 acres of bottom column, which just addresses 18 inches off of the ground of the lease.
So you guys are incorporating both style leases here on your farm.
Correct. We finagle with the gear and with the oysters. I really think that it's kind of one of the reasons it's like fine wine. We're constantly tasting them and looking at them and touching them and trying to grow them over here and then move them over here and then put them back over here. Like, that's what the process is all about, though, like finding these little things that really make your lease work, because it's never same farm to farm.
So you almost have, as the French use in their terminology, the terroir, you really get unique flavors out on this lease.
Right. And honestly, just how you cultivate them and the way that you take them out that day have so much impact on the flavor. Like, we've really found that utilizing a little bit of bottom column really gets a lot more like the taste that we're trying to get into it, but you have to like work with the bottom or with the water column a lot too, because it really puts in a lot of salt, and sometimes that, you know, like it can be really really sweet and really buttery, and you always want some salt with some oysters.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I noticed that we planned our meeting here today based on the tides. So is your operation very tidal influenced?
It is very tidal influenced because we use so much of that bottom gear that we're pretty much restricted to always working 2 hours down and 2 hours up. But I got my wetsuit with me just in case we're out here longer. That's consistent. You know, being a surfer and being friendly with the water, always being willing to get wet is, I think, a huge part of being a farmer, or out on the ocean, because like you're on the ocean, you're gonna get wet.
Now, you swam at UNC Wilmington, didn't you?
Right, I was a D1 swimmer there for a year, and then I finished up and got my oceanography degree there. But it's a good time. UNCW and the coastal living here definitely attracted me.
Well, I mean, it's not every day you meet somebody who's a Division I athlete that can literally apply those skills to their day job.
Yeah, we were doing the math because Alyssa was a really good swimmer in high school too. It's like 100-meter pool length right down the SEPA line, the Australian long lines that we have. So you just get a little warm-up swim, you know, 100 meter down, 100 meter back. We have mostly Australian gear as per the bags that we use, and then we use them in 2 different ways. We use them on the Australian longline and then on the French trellises. The French trellises are a 100-year-old way of cultivating leases, like back in the day when they used to just go up in the rivers and like knack off the good growing oysters and then put them in places like the Fin de Claire, where you get green-gilled oysters in France, like that go for $13 an oyster just because they grew in this area for a little bit. But they have these little racks that go off the bottom. It looks pretty much like a little table, like rack and bag. And then we put the Australian bags on those, which is kind of new.
And that's all considered water column, or that's bottom lease?
Everything with the French trellises is bottom column, and we utilize a lot, like more of that than we have SEPA lines, but it's hard, like I said, it's hard to see, and that's why we're so tidally restricted, is because it's really got to be on a good tide or with a wetsuit that you get to that stuff. Right.
We've had a lot of these beautiful kind of the greenish blue gills coming in this year to the restaurant, and people, I mean, they're picture worthy. Everybody's putting them on Instagram and tagging you guys on Instagram and stuff. But as I understand it, Connor, it's really pretty unique to North Carolina and France. Tell us a little bit more about the green gills.
So the Haslea is the algae that makes the gill of the oyster green. And really it takes a thick population of it and a good density of it for the oyster to really filter it hard and get the gill to be green. I've been told that the Haslea is present in like all the oceans in America, but it can just show up in little pockets of places for like a week or so and then diminish. And I think that the fact that we can call our oysters green gills and staple them green gills. I think since November this year, all the way till right now, I've been selling green gills, and every single oyster I pulled out is a green gill. It's a really, even the wild oysters coming in around us, it's a sign, as you guys will see when we drive out, that the water is crystal clear, that it can cook this perfect algae, that it's like a sign from the gods that it's clean water, man. It's like, that's why the oyster, it's $13 an oyster in France, because they really think that it's like antibiotic, antifungal, antibacterial and everything, and it passes that on to you too. And the fact that it comes around in the winter, it's like honey, you know?
That's awesome. You guys can make all those health claims in the beer industry. We're not allowed to claim that. Beer does anything but give you a little bit of a buzz. But looking back to September when the storm hit, did you ever think you'd have just this abundant green gill crop this year?
I don't think we would have done like most anything that we would have done without Mother Nature playing against us and then with us at the same time. It's kind of funny how your story shapes like that. Like, I mean, Florence like killed hundreds of thousands of oysters for us, and I mean, it's made stuff really tight. We didn't think we were going to be anywhere that we are right now. Like, thought we would be a little bit farther ahead and have more oysters, but without Mother Nature then blessing us with that green gill and helping us have that like consistently throughout the season, I mean, it's crazy how, you know, not just the tides, but like this Mother Nature in general has got to play nice. Yeah.
All right.
And how many years have you been operating this lease?
We've been on this lease for 1 year. We were down on Masonboro Sound for a year before that. And I've been working on my family's farms out in Hog Island since I was 16.
Awesome.
Well,
let's go see
I'm
the
excited
farm.
to check it out too,
I'm
man.
pretty excited too. Let's get out there.
Awesome. Let's
We'll
get
find
out. And also, when there's so many per bag like this, they haven't eaten as much as something else. You know, less people per bag makes full cupped oysters. Then we'll take them out after agitating them a few times as well, and we put them all here, and they go through this machine, which is a tumbler. The tumbler takes the oysters as we feed it down in small bits, washes them at a good angle, and beats them all up. So oysters like to be clean and happy and in their own space. So like this washer makes sure that not only every oyster is clean, but that it grows down into a deep cup instead of like long ways. So we're in Topsail Sound, North Carolina. It was called Topsail for the English settlers and the pirates that used to come through the area. The pirates used to put their pirate ships back here, and as soon as they would see the topsails of the ships approaching, they would go around the island to raid, and so the island's name Topsail has stuck and pronounced the same way up until today. We're 5 miles from the inlet on the south end of the island. It's called the New Topsail Inlet, and we're 5 miles from the Surf City Bridge in the background, which gives us a lot of our awesome fats, tastes, and flavors balanced with really good salt. Yeah, it's a unique place. So day in and day out, we meet up about an hour early before we want to go out on the water to pack up this boat and maybe this tumbler boat. Before we head out on the water, there's just a lot of packing and washing when you work on the saltwater. Make sure all your gear works when your farmer can't afford to always fix it. So staying on top of it is the first step. We come out here and we load up this skiff with the bags that we either need to sort by hand or that we need to sort on this tumbler. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we're sorting by hand because we're packing by hand and going to the markets. It's really important that we pack by hand because we believe that human hands is the best way to get the product that we want to get to the table. And by Wednesday, all the restaurants need it in just because they need to put it on their menus for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and Sundays, we're working on prepping the farm for upcoming season, upcoming growth, working on seed, tumbling stuff that is too heavy and could be market, a few months out from now. So it's just really more maintenance, whether it be crop or whether it be gear for those rest of the days. So load up the boat with what needs to be tumbled or what needs to be sorted, come back to this barge or come back onto this platform and sort up everything, split it up into more bags, pretty much always more bags than we came out with because there's growth always happening. And then putting what we're not hanging back up for market, we're hanging that back up either on the SEPA lines or putting them back on the French trellises, and then bagging and washing everything down with this water pump that cleans everything with the water right here, so that when the oysters go to the raw bar, they don't need to be rinsed under tap water or anything like that. They've been cleaned and look pristine with the water from the lease because it's, it's a raw product and you want to taste, like first smell is for taste, so it's important to have that too. Yeah, this thing always comes back out with us. We don't have all the correct permitting to leave out here, but I think that is in the future, like kind of like having like a little work shed out here. It'd be something real cool, real aesthetic for the area, just kind of like the working waterfront and like an oyster farm with a barn out on it would be like kind of cool. But right now it's really good to push it back all the way and we wash it down with fresh water. We wash everything down with fresh water. That takes another hour. So there's just a lot of packing in and packing out to it because like I said, the salt water is wrecking, but you got to stay on top of it. There's a lot of work to be done raising and lowering the SEPA lines to make sure that they dry out at the optimal amount every single day for what we want to do and for the singles that we want to grow. We like to dry out our oysters. It doesn't let them grow all the time, but it makes them grow the right way, we found. And that's something that we really focus on, and that takes a good bit of time every day. And then an immense amount of cleaning. Like I feel like with any job, like you don't think about the cleaning, but there's a ton of cleaning in farming. There's power washing baths, there's just scrubbing stuff, there's just, making things are clean and happy. Like that's how you raise good live product, is making sure that I got to pack in and pack out for everything. Nothing gets left here, so we bring a lunchbox out, stay nice and hydrated. Like I said, in the summer we're out here for like 10 to 12 hours a day trying to keep up with everything, and even in the winter we're still out here 6 to 8 hours busting and everything that we can, blistering cold. That's what it's about. I mean, it's farming. You've got stuff out here. You can't leave it unattended. Like it's out in the water. It's out where other people could even see it. So you really got to leave. You really got to be on top of it. That's just like the pride that we take in our stuff, is making sure everything's clean, looks nice and neat.
Thank you for joining us at the Aquaculture Academy. Get ready to get into business planning for your oyster venture.